Hey BookTube, it's Angie. It's been a little bit since I've done one of these series videos, so I have actually a couple of them I'm going to try to film today, but I'm not quite sure when you will see them. I'm in the process of downsizing my library, hopefully. I feel like my reading tastes are changing or evolving or something, and a lot of the things that I thought I was into a few years ago or even a few months ago don't do anything for me now as far as reading experience. So I don't know, I feel like my overall book interests are moving in a different direction as far as, I don't know, like writing style or something. I don't know. I just notice I'm picking up a lot of books lately where I'm like, why do I have this? This is crap. This is boring. I have so many books like this. And I just, that combined with, you know, as you get older, I mean, not that I'm like, you know, aging rapidly or anything, but just like, you know, the natural progression of life. As you get further along in your life, it's not that uncommon to get to where you're like, I don't need that much shit around me all the time. You tend to start streamlining what you actually need and want in your life. And I know a lot of us on YouTube have gone through that because I've seen a boatload of videos where people are talking about this. I'm not saying I'm gonna like get rid of everything and go live in a tiny house van or something like that. But I'm looking around at a lot of the books and things I have and I'm like, I don't need these things anymore. I feel like, honestly, I feel like part of it was kind of tied to my mental illness and depression, and it was working as sort of a coding from dealing with stuff, but I've been dealing with it little by little. I've been addressing and facing some of the things that have been bothering me because I'm in my head all the time. And I think part of that process is you get to a point where you don't need so much of a shield around you anymore after a while, if you're doing this process productively. Sorry, that was a little bit of a digression. My point getting into all that was to say that you'll likely see a number of these videos coming up as far as the series videos, because I think getting rid of the series, that it's going to clear up a lot of room on my shelves. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a gradual process, but I am in that process of getting rid of some of these things. And so a lot of this will be me making videos, making content, and then getting rid of the books. So if I ever do a bookshelf tour and you're looking for a specific book I've mentioned and it's not there, that's probably what happened to it. It didn't survive the purge. So this one, I have two different series by the same author. I'll do two different videos for them and then probably post them at different times. I just want to get some of these filmed, like I said, to get rid of the books. So both of these series are by Shelly Shepard Gray. I don't know if she's done, I want to say she's maybe done some mainstream writing, but she's mainly known as a Christian fiction author these days. But she writes a lot of historical fiction within that genre. And so I have two different series that I've been sent from, who sent these to me? Thomas Nelson, I think. I think those are the ones that, see, they're, yeah, it must have been Thomas Nelson. I was about to say Bethany House, but Bethany House's books have a different overall aesthetic to them. I think these are Thomas Nelson. So they sent me these series to try out and review, and I posted the reviews a while back. I will try to remember to link the written reviews down below for anybody who prefers those or likes to see those in addition to these videos. So I wanted to do this chronologically, so I'm going to start with her earlier series she did. And I remember when these first came out, I was really interested in the subject matter, but it just it took a while for me to get around to actually reading them. I noticed that other people, other book bloggers, other book reviewers were being sent this set, and then all of a sudden I started getting them. So that's the, what is this series? The name of the series. Chicago World's Fair Mysteries. So you have Secrets of Sloane House, Deception at Sable Hill, or on Sable Hill, Deception on Sable Hill, and then Whispers in the Reading Room. And these all take place around the 1893, do I have that year right? I think it's 1893, yes. Chicago World's Fair. If you're one of the booktubers that follows like serial killer history, if you know Devil in the White City, this is around that same era. It's even kind of touching upon the same elements as that nonfiction book, but not exactly, but it touches upon some of the same stuff. So book one, these are all, the main connection between them is the Chicago World's Fair. It all involves different women. This is one of those series I would say read them in order, because there are characters that overlap. There's characters that, you know, you see a little bit of in one book and then they get a main feature in another book. So I'll just go through the general premises of these individually real quick. So Secrets of Sloane House has to do with this girl. What was the girl's name? Sorry. It involves two sisters. I was trying to remember the other sister's name. Miranda is a Wisconsin farm girl who, like many across the country at that time, had heard about the Chicago World's Fair, got really excited about it, wanted to go. And if you've read the history of that time period, you know there was like this sort of mass exodus of women who suddenly picked up and tried to travel by themselves because they were really enamored with seeing this big historical and scientific event. So a lot of them just sort of bombarded Chicago, but usually not with a real great plan of what to do from there. It's like they just sort of showed up at the train station and hoped that their family would come pick them up, or they'd be able to find a room at the inn or something. But because it was one of the biggest events in the country at the time, obviously most everything was full. That was part of the reason why the murderer that's featured in The Devil in the White City, why he succeeded the way he did, because he magically had rooms when nobody else did. So this is kind of in that same vein. Miranda is a farm girl who comes to Chicago, gets a job at the Sloane House as a housekeeper, I want to say. Some sort of domestic position within the house. And when she first writes home to her sister Rosalind, all the letters are really optimistic and happy, and they have all sorts of like upstairs, downstairs type funny stories. But then the tone in the letters starts to change little by little, and Rosalind's radar starts to peak just a little bit, like, huh, that doesn't quite sound like my sister. But she doesn't say anything at first. She's like, maybe she's got something going on at work, I don't know. And then the letters start to get more and more dark and cryptic, and then all of a sudden Miranda just disappears altogether. So Rosalind gets the plan together to go to Chicago, get a position within Sloane House herself, but she doesn't tell anybody that she's Miranda's sister, because she wants to sort of low-key find out information just in case whatever happened to her sister, if it was criminal in nature, she doesn't know. But if it is, if it has to do with somebody within the house, she doesn't, Rosalind doesn't want to give away her position. So she just comes in under the guise of a regular domestic looking for work, and she takes up the position, I think in the same position her sister was in. And when she gets there, she's sort of immediately thrust into the gossip of the house and the sort of restrictions and how-tos and all of that of the social classes between the domestics and the Sloane family. And also she's having to listen to gossip regarding her sister. Turns out her sister actually didn't have a ton of fans in the house. So Rosalind doesn't know what's going on. She's not real sure how to find out the information she needs because she feels like she can't trust the people that she's working around. She ends up developing a friendship with, what's his name? Reed Armstrong, who is a heir to a silver fortune. And you might be thinking, well, how are they going to run into each other? Well, it turns out he's friends with the Sloan family, and the way his mother brought him up doesn't have such a stigma against the lower classes. So he often approaches her with kindness and friendship, and she eventually starts to warm up to him. At one point, she sort of accidentally blurts out what she's actually doing in town, but he doesn't freak out. He offers to help her, and surprisingly actually gets his mom on board, because his mom, even though she's a woman of money and position, she also believes that you shouldn't judge people for how much money they have. You know, if they're trying to make an honest living, give them credit for that. So she's a good, upstanding person. She tries to help Rosalind figure out what happened to her sister Miranda. So that's basically the idea of this one, is her just trying to figure out why communication just dropped off. And there is, like I said, there's one character in here that's not, it's not the sisters, but there's another character that comes in kind of nearer to the end that is a victim of sexual assault. So that is, if you're trigger sensitive, that is mentioned in this book. But she makes a repeat appearance in the next book, which is Deception of Sable Hill. She's actually one of the starring characters in this book. Also, what's his name? Detective Ryan? He might. I don't know if Detective Ryan shows up in this one. I know he's in the other two. But Detective Ryan might be a common thread through all three. It's been a little bit since I've read these, so I don't know for sure if he's in this one. But Detective Ryan is in the other two. So, Sloan House is, let's see, I think the first book was right around the time the fair started. This is full force the fair is going on, I believe. And the girl that was assaulted towards the end of book one, she's now one of the stars of this book. She gets her main story here, and you get to know her a little bit better. And we learn that this one gets, because of the topics that are brought up towards the end of that one, this one gets a little bit dark, because the girl that comes in, she talks about the details of what happened to her, and suffering from PTSD and self-harm and depression and all of those dark things because of the experience. And then on top of that, she is still trying to go through, because she is a person of position in the book. She's trying to go through all these society balls and things like that and act like she's fine, because one thing that is brought up in this book is it does address some of the aspects of rape culture, what we think of as rape culture today, as far as her going through that experience but then not telling anybody because she's afraid of what it will do to her socially. So she doesn't say anything about who was her attacker, because she knows who it was. She can identify him, but he also is someone of power. So she said, going after him, will that ruin me? And will people even believe me? Or all of those things that women are still fighting with when they're sexually assaulted in today's world, she brings up in this book. So she has all this crap going on in her head already. And at the time, with the fair and everything, there's also I was about to say serial killer, but he doesn't kill everybody he attacks. But the police are calling him the society slasher, I think they dub him, where he attacks society women, debutantes, But he doesn't always kill them. Sometimes he just permanently disfigures them. But either way, obviously they want to catch him. And that's when Detective Ryan comes in, and he, at one ball that this woman is attending, he comes in and acts as a bodyguard and also an undercover detective to see if he can figure out any information or even spot the guy. And sure enough, something goes down at that gathering, and our main character, the female, is in the middle of that. It's pretty gruesome at the beginning, so again, if you're triggered by violence, that is something to keep in mind with this series. It's not a lot, but it does come up from time to time. So our main character in this book is all kinds of messed up in the head because she's dealing from the attack from book 1 and now witnessing the attack on her friend in this book. So a lot of that story is around this. Or did that backwards. A lot of this book is around that story. And the problem with, I think, this book and the first book is the mysteries kind of were a little, at least the mystery aspect to things, it was a little bit weak. These stories, even though the series is called The World's Fair Mysteries, these stories are much more character driven. I'm not saying that because the mysteries are weak, the stories are boring, because I did honestly like this series, and I probably will end up keeping this one, at least for a little while. I'm on the fence, because I'm like, you know, it wasn't 5 stars across the board, but there's something about this where I'm like, I feel like I would probably reread this again down the road. But yeah, the mysteries, they always seem to take a back seat to the characters and just their own personal drama and their flirtations and romances and things like that. I had wished there was a little bit more mystery to the first 2 altogether. Also in this one, I feel like, if I remember right, the World's Fair element was actually in the background. They mentioned it once or twice, even though they do say that the fair is still going on. Other than mentioning, oh yeah, we went to the fair the other day kind of thing, it's not really brought up that much. It's not really as much of a character or an environment as I was hoping for. Because that was one of the big pulls for me to pick up this series, because I am fascinated with anything that has to do with world fairs, world expositions, anything like that, whether it's Chicago or France or any of that. And that time period I find fascinating, with the beginnings of what we would kind of think of as modern science, I guess. You know, the very start of things like the light bulb and radio waves and the origins of things we rely on now. Just being at the brink of all of that historical and scientific knowledge and excitement, I feel like that must have been an amazing time to be there. So I always love reading books that at least in some way put me in that environment. But this one, it was a little weak. Didn't play as much of a character, but funny enough, she brings it in more in this one, the last one. Even though this one on the back tells you this story is starting just a few months after the World's Fair has ended. But it was still a pretty big character in and of itself, because the characters themselves, they're moving around the grounds, and at one point the grounds also serve as the scene to a crime. So you do see a good bit of the fairgrounds. I would say, like, if you're really interested in that aspect of it, book 1 probably still has the best, because she's creating that sensation of these people from out in the country and you know, more remote cities seeing this fairgrounds and this exposition hall and all of that for the very first time, which, like I said, that sensation walking over that bridge and seeing all those white buildings and the lights and everything, that must have been amazing. So she gives you much more of that sensation in book 1. When you get to book 3, everything it's kind of like when the circus is getting ready to leave town, everything's sort of tarped up and everything, but she still works it in somehow. I feel like this one ended up being my favorite one out of the series, but I haven't told you what happened in this one. So this one has the bookish element, as you can see. This has to do with a reading room, which is sort of like the precursor to the way we imagine modern public libraries now. It was sort of like that, but with the reading room, it was more like, it was sort of like a library crossed with like a private club kind of thing. You had to pay a membership to go to these special rooms and borrow the books and read them there. You know, public libraries now, you can just walk in and sign up for a card and you're pretty much free to go. But here, I think it was more like, you know, they actually sat down and interviewed you and took a membership fee and all that kind of stuff. So this one focuses on Lydia, who is the sort of librarian position in the reading room. And she really likes her job. It's really nice and quiet, and she's very bookish anyway, so she likes the peace. She's not overwhelmed with patrons usually, but there's one patron that comes in all of a sudden who starts frequenting the reading room a lot, and she gets kind of taken with him because he's dark-haired and dark-eyed, and he doesn't say hardly anything, and you know, it's hard for a girl not to be at least a little bit curious about that. He's like, oh, he's dark and handsome and he likes books and air of mystery around him. Like, come on. It's like, we're at least gonna look. And that's, you know, basically what her brain did. She's like, oh, what is that guy about? And finally, they get around to talking, and over time, she finds out that he's actually the owner of a saloon and gambling house down the road, but he sneaks into the reading room because he doesn't want people that work for him or around him to find out about his reading habit and him take a knock to his street cred. Like, when he's at work, he's the big tough boss guy, and so he's like, I can't have them find out I'm a sensitive reader. Come on. So yeah, I come over here on the other side of town. But of course Lydia's like, well, your secret's safe with me. And so they develop sort of a casual acquaintance, and then Lydia has her own shit going on at home, with struggling with her and her mom being left with little to no money after her dad passes away, and this rich guy starts pursuing Lydia as far as talking about marriage and stuff, and because of her money struggle, she's like, you know what, maybe I'll go ahead and take the guy up on his offer. But we find out pretty soon that the guy has a little bit of a temper problem, or a lot of a temper problem. He takes Lydia to lunch one day, and I forget what she says, but she's just making conversation with him, but he doesn't like the way she posed a question or something, and he goes off on her and is just screaming in the middle of this dining hall. And I think at one point he like grabs her arm really hard and he's trying to get her attention, and he's squeezing, and she's feeling like, oh, this is gonna bruise, and she's freaking out. And it just so happens, what's his name? Sebastian. He is the saloon owner. He happens to be in the dining room when that happens, of this restaurant. And he walks over and he's like, excuse me, do you want to unhand her maybe? And, you know, figuring this guy works in gambling and saloon hall and stuff, he's not afraid to get rough and throw people out. He's part of his job. And that just makes the fiance guy angry more, because he's thinking, oh, you're having a fling with this guy behind my back. He seems to know you. And then it just turns into this huge violent scene, which Sebastian has to quell real quick. And his friendship with Lydia just deepens after that, because he went into rescuer mode, and it's very hard for a lot of women to resist rescuer mode. They develop a friendship, and Sebastian becomes really taken with Lydia because we learn more about Sebastian's childhood, where he's basically had to make his own way from day one. His parents were kind of crap or non-existent. And he had a very rough and tumble life on the streets, and nobody really gave him a chance. He had to make his own chances kind of guy. And so when he meets Lydia, and she doesn't hold any grudge against him, she doesn't judge him in any way, at least at first, he's very taken with her having that open heart and giving him a chance and really having faith in him. And he doesn't want to let her down, but also he can't help how he makes a living. You know, it's kept him off the streets, so he feels bad that it's not something more on the up and up. But Lydia doesn't say too much about it until it gets to the point where there are just a lot of murders happening on or around his establishment doorstep, and it seems like there's a lot of shady, crooked cops who are passing through his business, and she gets to the point where she's like, okay, what the hell? It's like, are you good or not? And so then there's a mystery around that develops. I felt like this one had the most of the element of mystery I was looking for, and this one had the most atmospheric writing, and the characters here felt the most real, I feel like, or at least I was connecting with them the best in this one. So as far as like I told you guys it was a Christian writer. As far as the Christian theme isn't actually that strong in most of these, I don't think. I would say it's mild to moderate. It's not super strong, but I think I forget which one, but I think there's one in there somewhere where, a Bible to a verse or two might be referenced, but for the most part, it's usually just like people entering a church or saying something like God willing or something like that. Very mild. Okay, yeah, I noted that the religious aspect was the strongest in the third book. 1 or 2 Bible passages quoted. So there you go. Let's see. There's something else I noted on here I thought I would mention. One thing I do like about Gray's writing is, or one thing I wanted to give her credit for, is she developed the friendships in this book, and even the romantic relationships, she develops them at a realistic pace, which I so appreciate, because, like a lot of readers, I can get a little, I don't mind it. I mean, I don't go off the handle every time I see it, but sometimes I get a little bit burnt out on the Insta romance kind of thing. But also it is a little annoying when it goes on for pages and pages and you're like, okay, seriously, something would have happened by now. So I do like that hers isn't, it feels like it's at a normal pace, where you meet for coffee or something one day, and then there are a few interactions, and then because it's a novel, there's usually some sort of life threat or something like that to amp up the emotions and all of that. But still, it's not like, oh my god, we almost died, we should get married tomorrow. It's like they talk about it, and the wedding might not actually happen for like a year or 2 yet, kind of thing. So I do appreciate that this, and also in the second series I'm going to talk about in a different video. In that series as well, I noticed just her character relationships in general are just very well paced. But like I said, the mystery of the World Fair Mysteries is a little bit weak for the most part. I did mention that there is the trigger warning for the first 2 books. I don't think it's mentioned in the third book, but the first 2 books do mention sexual assaults. The sexual assault involves strangulation, forceful kissing, groping, and then there is also hinted rape. I don't think in the first book it's actually described, but I think it's the way she writes some of the thoughts of the character stuff. It's suggested that that's probably what happened down the road. I think I put a note about the second one where I said, I think I talked about this a little bit earlier. I said the mystery in the second book takes a backseat to Detective Ryan and his partner, his cop partner, having bland flirtations with lady interests. Also, actual affair hardly mentioned till 150 pages in. Most of the book is either in police station or in the living room of different residences. In book 2, I wrote that the plot is slower, but it picks up near the end. But by then, you've already been through like 22 chapters invested, and at that point, there's only like 50 pages left in the book before the big moment happens. And I was a little bit annoyed by that. I was like, you had to picked up the pace a little bit. Oh, I didn't mention this though, at least not that much. Book 2 does do a nice job of talking about the just social characteristics and sort of the social climate as far as like the different social classes and economic classes. I did mention, or I did note that it says it does discuss unfair prejudices between economic classes, and I like that she brought up that the prejudices could go both ways. You had characters on both ends of the economic spectrum, and they both had prejudices against each other, which usually it's one way or the other. So I did like that it was balanced, and that you did have impoverished people who were maybe unfairly looking at rich people as well as the other way around. I think the only other thing I noted is that as far as Lydia's fiance, the violent one early on, he makes a comment about she can't wait for her to give up her bookish silliness, which there's just a lot about him, obviously, that's going to make you groan and cringe and get angry. But I made a note here that that was probably done so that you could have that to balance against Sebastian's goodness with Lydia and his kindness and patience. And Sebastian goes out of his way when he's around Lydia to soften himself up and comment that he actually appreciates and really loves her intelligence. That series. So this is, this one more time. So yeah, this is Secrets of Sloane House is book 1. Deception of Sable Hill is book 2. And then Whispers in the Reading Room is book 3. So I think that covers everything I was going to talk about in this series. I figured with this one, you know, a lot of videos I tend to do the closeout with a related quote or something. I figured with this one, I have a few pictures that can show you, if you're not familiar with this era as far as the Chicago World Fair and why I get so excited reading about it, I'm going to do just a little mini slideshow at the end of this to show you what some of the images of what our characters would be seeing look like. So hope you enjoy, and we will talk soon. Bye guys.